Alan Shugart and the 5 megabyte revolution. Imagine sitting in front of a personal computer in the late 1970s. There's no cloud storage, no solid-state drive, no USB stick, and no internal disk holding thousands of programs. There may not even be a hard drive anywhere in the room. When you want to run software, you insert a floppy disk or connect a cassette recorder, press play, and wait while the machine attempts to read a stream of electronics sounds. If the tape is damaged, the volume is wrong, or the loading process fails, you may have to begin again. When you finish your work, every document and every program must be saved onto removable media with very little capacity. A modern computer user would find this almost unbearable, but for the first generation of personal computer owners, it was normal. Then, in 1980, a young company introduced a metal box that changed the expectations of the entire industry. It was called the ST-506. It could store only 5 megabytes, less data than a single high-resolution photograph today, and it cost roughly $1,500. Yet this small drive helped turn the personal computer from an experimental machine into a practical tool for business, engineering, software development, and everyday work. Behind the company was Alan Shugart, an engineer and entrepreneur whose name is far less famous than those of Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, or the founders of Intel. He did not invent the personal computer. He did not invent the first hard disk. His contribution was different. Shugart understood that the computer revolution would not be powered by processors and software alone. Every useful computer needed a reliable place to keep information after the power was switched off. His career became a bridge between the enormous disk systems of the mainframe era and the compact storage devices that could fit inside a desktop computer. To understand why 5 megabytes could be revolutionary, we must return to a time when digital storage occupied an entire room. In 1956, IBM shipped the first commercial hard disk system as part of the IBM 305 RAMAC. Its disk unit used 50 large magnetic platters, stood taller than a person, weighed more than a ton when its supporting equipment was included, and stored the equivalent of only a few megabytes. It was an extraordinary achievement because it allowed information to be reached directly instead of being searched in sequence on magnetic tape. A business could request a particular record, and the machine could move its read and write mechanism to the correct location. This idea, random access, became one of the foundations of modern computing. But the RAMAC was not a personal device. It belonged in large organizations with technical staff, controlled environments, and budgets that ordinary people could never imagine. Alan Field Shugart entered IBM near the beginning of this transformation. Born in Los Angeles in 1930, he earned a degree in engineering physics from the University of Redlands and joined IBM in 1951 as a field engineer. His early work required him to visit customers and solve practical problems in real offices. That experience mattered. It taught him that technology succeeds only when it works reliably for the people who must use it. Over an 18-year career at IBM, Shugart contributed to and managed difficult disk drive programs, including work connected with the RAMAC generation. He developed a reputation as an effective leader who could inspire loyalty among engineers. He was not merely interested in individual components. He understood teams, production, customers, schedules, and the difficult path between a laboratory prototype and a product that could be manufactured in large numbers. By the late 1960s, the computer industry was searching for a storage medium that was smaller and easier to move than the rigid disks used in hard drives. IBM needed an inexpensive way to load control information into computer systems. The solution became the flexible disk, later known everywhere as the floppy disk. Unlike the heavy platters sealed inside a hard drive, a floppy disk could be removed, carried, mailed, and inserted into another machine. Shugart, working as a manager at IBM's San Jose operations, helped direct the environment in which this technology emerged. The first IBM floppy system used an 8-inch flexible disk protected by a jacket. Its capacity was tiny by modern standards, but it could replace thousands of punched cards and made the transfer of digital information much simpler. In 1969, Shugart left IBM for Memorex, another important storage company. A few years later, he started Shugart Associates. The new business focused on turning floppy disk drives into practical, mass-produced products. This was a crucial step. An invention may demonstrate what is possible, but an industry is created only when factories can build thousands or millions of reliable units at a price customers will accept. Shugart Associates helped make the 8-inch floppy drive widely available. The company he founded later introduced the smaller 5¼ inch floppy format, which fit the new generation of desktop machines far better than the larger 8-inch design. Although Shugart had already left the company after a disagreement with its board, his name remained attached to a storage format that would become familiar to computer users around the world. The rise of the floppy disk made early microcomputers far more useful. Programs could be distributed on disks. Users could save documents, transfer files, and build collections of software. Operating systems such as CP/M could be adapted to different machines and loaded from removable media. For hobbyists and small businesses, the floppy disk represented freedom from paper tape, punched cards, and unreliable cassette storage. But every success creates a new expectation. Once users experienced convenient digital storage, they wanted more of it. A floppy disk was removable and affordable, but its capacity was limited. Large applications could require several disks. A business might need a cabinet filled with labeled media just to maintain customer records, accounting files, or inventory information. Users had to remember which disk contained which document. They had to insert and remove disks repeatedly. Floppies could bend, collect dust, or fail at exactly the wrong moment. Software developers were forced to keep programs small because storage was scarce. The personal computer was becoming more powerful, but its ability to preserve information was falling behind. The obvious answer was a hard disk, but the hard disks of the 1970s were generally too large and too expensive for the emerging desktop market. The challenge was not simply to reduce capacity. Engineers had to shrink the platters, motors, heads, electronics, and mechanical systems while maintaining precision. Inside a hard drive, magnetic platters spin while precisely controlled heads locate and record microscopic regions of data. Shrinking its motors, electronics, and moving parts without sacrificing reliability required far more than placing a large machine in a smaller box. In the late 1970s, Alan Shugart re-entered the disk drive business at a moment when personal computing was accelerating. Companies such as Apple, Commodore, and Tandy were proving that desktop computers could reach customers beyond universities and large corporations. Microprocessors were becoming more capable, memory was improving, and software markets were forming. Shugart and Finis Connor, a former colleague from Memorex, discussed an opportunity that many established manufacturers had not fully recognized. What if a hard drive could be built in the same physical size as the 5.25-inch floppy drive already used in desktop? Computers? A computer manufacturer could place the hard disk into a familiar drive bay. The storage device would no longer require a separate cabinet or specialized installation. It could become another component inside the machine. Along with Syed Iftikhar, Doug Mann, and Tom Mitchell, Shugart and Connor helped establish a company initially incorporated as Seagate Technology. Because the name could be confused with Shugart Associates, the business soon became Seagate Technology. The mission was direct but ambitious: produce compact hard disk drives for the new personal computer market. The market was still uncertain, and many people continued to view personal computers as hobbyist machines. Seagate's founders were betting that useful software would create demand for permanent storage, and that computer makers would welcome a standardized drive that fit existing designs. The result of that bet was the ST-506, introduced in 1980. It was the first widely recognized 5.25-inch hard disk drive and was designed for microcomputers. The device was full height, meaning it occupied the vertical space of the larger drive bays common at the time, and it stored 5 megabytes of unformatted data capacity in the terms used by the industry. Its model number became more than the name of one product. The ST-506's interface and physical form influenced an entire generation of drives, controllers, and compatible systems. From the outside, it was a rectangular metal enclosure. Inside were rigid magnetic platters, a spindle motor, read and write heads, and actuator for positioning those heads and precise mechanical parts that had to work together every time the computer requested a file. To a modern observer, 5 megabytes sounds almost comic. A short video clip, a software update, or even a photograph from a smartphone can exceed that amount. But historical inventions must be judged by the problems they solved at the time, not by the standards of the future. 5 megabytes was several times the capacity of a typical floppy disk, and unlike removable media, the hard drive remained available inside the system. A user could store an operating environment, applications, and working files in one place. Instead of searching through a pile of disks, the computer could retrieve information directly. Instead of loading a major program in separate pieces, the user could keep it installed. Instead of treating every byte as a precious resource, software designers could begin imagining larger and more sophisticated tools. The transformation was psychological as well as technical. With only floppy disks, a computer often felt temporary. The machine awakened when a system disk was inserted, performed a task, and depended on the user to manage a collection of removable media. With a hard drive, the computer gained continuity. It could remember its working environment. It could hold a growing archive of documents. It could become a permanent desk rather than an empty surface that had to be rebuilt at every session. For businesses, this was especially important. Accounting systems could maintain more transactions. Inventory programs could keep larger product lists. Word processors could store many documents without constant disk changes. Databases could grow beyond the practical limits of removable media. Software developers could keep source code, tools, and compiled programs together. The hard disk did not merely make the personal computer more convenient, it expanded the kinds of work the machine could perform. The ST-506 was expensive, and early installations still required controllers, cables, careful configuration, and technical knowledge. It was not an instant consumer product in the modern sense, yet the drive had demonstrated that compact hard disk storage was possible and commercially valuable. Competing manufacturers quickly entered the field. Some licensed or followed Seagate-compatible designs. As more companies built drives and controllers around similar standards, prices could fall, production could rise, and computer makers could integrate hard disks into their systems with less risk. The ST-506 form factor and interface became common reference points throughout the industry. Seagate followed with the ST-412, a 10 megabyte model introduced in the early 1980s. This capacity would become strongly associated with one of the most influential machines of the period, the IBM Personal Computer XT. IBM had entered the personal computer market in 1981 with the original IBM PC, a machine whose open use of components from outside suppliers helped define a broad compatible ecosystem. The original PC commonly relied on floppy drives, but the PC XT, introduced in 1983, made a 10 megabyte hard disk one of its defining features. Suddenly, permanent internal storage was not merely an exotic upgrade for specialists. It was part of a serious business computer sold by one of the most powerful technology companies in the world. The association with IBM helped validate the entire compact drive industry. By the middle of the decade, hard drives were moving toward standard equipment in personal computers, especially systems intended for professional use. Capacity rose from 5 megabytes to 10, 20, 40, and far beyond. Each increase changed software expectations. Developers used the available space to create richer interfaces, larger databases, more detailed games, and complex operating systems. Users responded by generating more files. The pattern became self-reinforcing. Larger storage encouraged larger software and more data, which created demand for even larger storage. This cycle continues today. Alan Shugart's significance lies partly in recognizing that cycle before it was obvious. He understood that the demand for storage would not remain fixed. People rarely decide that they have enough information forever. Once storage becomes available, they discover new reasons to use it. Businesses keep more records. Artists create larger media files. Engineers build more detailed designs. Families preserve photographs and videos. Software grows in capability. The 5 megabyte drive was not the final answer. It was evidence that a new market could exist. Shugart also understood the difference between demonstrating a device and building an industry. Disk drives combined precision mechanics with electronics, so factories had to produce them in large numbers without losing reliability. His experience at IBM, Memorex, and Shugart Associates helped Seagate transform a bold idea into a dependable product line. Within a decade of its founding, Seagate had become the world's largest producer of disk drives. The company's growth showed how rapidly storage had moved from a specialized concern to a central part of personal computing. Yet the story was never the achievement of one man alone. Finis Conner played a major role in recognizing and pursuing the 5.25-inch opportunity. Engineers such as Syed Iftikhar, Doug Mann, Tom Mitchell, and many others contributed technical, operational, and business expertise. Earlier IBM teams had created the first commercial disk systems and floppy technology. Competing manufacturers pushed prices down and capacities upward. Computer companies created machines that used the drives, and software developers gave customers reasons to need them. Alan Shugart's legacy is strongest when understood as leadership within this larger network. He repeatedly assembled people, recognized market transitions, and helped move storage technology into forms that more users could afford and adopt. Storage continued shrinking while its capacity expanded. 3.5-inch drives became common in desktop computers, and 2.5-inch models helped make laptops practical. Better magnetic materials, heads, controllers, and manufacturing moved capacity from megabytes to gigabytes and then terabytes. Despite enormous technical changes, the same principle remained. Storage had to become easier for manufacturers to integrate and for customers to use. Then, solid-state drives began changing the industry again. Instead of spinning magnetic platters and moving heads, an SSD stores data in non-volatile semiconductor memory. With no mechanical arm waiting to reach a track, solid-state storage can access information rapidly and resist many forms of physical shock. As flash memory prices declined, SSDs spread through laptops, desktop computers, servers, and consumer devices. To some people, this appeared to mark the end of the hard disk era, but the reality is more complex. Solid-state drives dominate many situations where speed, silence, low power use, and compact size are essential. Magnetic hard drives remain important where enormous capacity at a lower cost is required, including data centers, archives, backup, systems, and large personal collections. The technologies coexist because storage is not one problem. It is a balance among speed, capacity, durability, energy use, physical size, and price. Cloud storage adds another layer, but the cloud is not an invisible place. It is a network of real data centers filled with physical storage devices. Every photograph uploaded, every document synchronized, every video streamed, and every artificial intelligence model preserved must ultimately exist on hardware somewhere. The user may no longer see the drive, but the fundamental need that Shugart recognized has only become larger. Modern society produces data at a scale that would have been unimaginable when 5 megabytes seemed revolutionary. Alan Shugart did not live to see every stage of this transformation. He died in 2006. By then, personal computers routinely contained drives measured in hundreds of gigabytes, and flash storage was already preparing the next major transition. His name was honored within the computer history community, but it never became as widely recognized as the names associated with famous computers, operating systems, or consumer brands. That relative obscurity reveals something about the way technological history is remembered. People celebrate the devices they can see and the software they interact with directly. Storage often remains hidden inside a metal case, working silently until it fails. Yet without storage, a computer loses much of its identity. A processor can calculate, memory can hold temporary instructions, and a screen can display results, but permanent storage allows the machine to preserve a world. It holds the operating system that gives the computer its behavior. It keeps the applications that make it useful. It protects the documents, photographs, music, designs, records, and memories that make the device personal. This is why the ST-506 deserves more than a footnote. It was not the first hard disk in history, and it was not the only compact drive developed in 1980. Its importance came from the way it connected a proven storage concept to a rapidly growing personal computer market. By matching the size of a familiar floppy drive bay and supporting an ecosystem of compatible controllers and systems, it helped establish a practical path for internal PC storage. The 5 megabyte capacity that now appears microscopic gave early users something they had never possessed in the same way: a persistent digital workspace inside a desktop machine. Consider the distance between the IBM RAMAC and the ST-506. In 1956, a few megabytes required a disk unit larger than household furniture and weighing more than a small car. About 24 years later, Seagate placed roughly 5 megabytes into a box that could fit inside a desktop computer. The capacity was similar in broad scale, but the physical size, cost, market, and purpose had changed dramatically. One system belonged to large institutions. The other pointed toward individual ownership. That comparison captures the true meaning of technological progress. Innovation is not always the creation of a completely new principle. Sometimes it is the process of making a powerful principle smaller, cheaper, more reliable, and available to millions of people. Today, 5 megabytes can disappear in an instant. A browser stores more than that in temporary files without asking. A modern operating system uses thousands of times more space. A single game can require tens or hundreds of gigabytes. Consumers purchase multi-terabyte drives and still worry that they will run out of room. It is easy to look backward and laugh at the ST-506, but that reaction misses the lesson. Every enormous technology begins at a scale that later generations find difficult to respect. The value of the first practical product is not measured by how it compares with the future. It is measured by the door it opens. The ST-506 opened a door to computers that could remember more, run larger programs, support real businesses, and become permanent parts of daily life. Behind that door stood decades of engineering and a man who understood that information needed a home. Alan Shugart's career traveled from the room-sized disk systems of IBM to floppy drives, and then to compact hard disks for personal computers. At each stage, the central question remained the same: how can digital information be stored in a form that people can actually use? His answer was not a single invention, but a lifelong effort to turn storage from specialized machinery into an accessible industry. The next time a computer starts instantly, opens a large project, searches thousands of files, or preserves years of personal memories, it is worth remembering how different the experience once was. Before terabytes, before SSDs, and before the cloud, there was a 5 megabyte metal box spinning magnetic platters inside an early computer. It seemed expensive, limited, and mechanical. It was also a revolution. Alan Shugart did not give the personal computer its processor, its screen, or its operating system. He helped give it something equally essential: a place to remember. And once the personal computer could remember, it could begin to become part of our lives.